Nickelodeon!
So let's start this rebirth with the first original cartoon from the Nicktoons network, Kappa Mikey. This show stars Mikey Simon. Let's call him an actor. That's what he calls himself, even though he hasn't really been able to pull off any roles. However, his luck changes when he wins a contest to be brought to Japan and star in an action show called Lily Moo, surrounded by anime characters. You have the eponymous Lily, an abrasive girl who hates everything, but mostly hates Mikey. Then there's her co-star, Mitsuki, a shrinking violet who has a crush on Mikey but can never seem to tell him. And completing their team is their mascot, Guano. On the show, he's not much more than a Pokemon, I can only say his name, but offset he's the writer and director, and neurotic. And finally you have the villain, Gonard, who I will probably be calling Gonad sometime in this video. On set, he's an over-the-top villain, but off the set, he's your lovable idiot who has this big eater tendencies, especially for sandwiches. The show is financed by their producer, Ozu, a super serious businessman who always seems to be 2 seconds short from canceling the entire Lily Moo show and throwing the entire cast onto the streets. And always by his side is his loyal yes man, yes man. The show follows the cast of Lily Moo in their daily celebrity but not really celebrity lives, or how their particular quirks or issues need to be overcome in order to get an episode of the show done. Sort of. Considering that one of the characters' names is literally a euphemism for defecation, I really didn't have much hope for the show overall. So are my first impressions faulty? Well, let's take a closer look, because there's a lot to talk about. And I'm actually having trouble figuring out where to get started. How about with the animation? Because there's no way around this. Kappa Mikey is an ugly show. Not one of the worst that I've ever seen, obviously, but the animation and the visuals is a constant problem, because the show relies a lot on visual humor. The main premise is definitely a good one. In the show, the American characters, Mikey, specifically are drawn in an American style, while the Japanese characters are animated and drawn in an anime style. They have a lot of expressions that you tend to see in anime. They go chibi occasionally, they have cat smiles, eyes go white sometimes. It's definitely a good idea. The problem is that it looks god-awful. Either the technology or the budget or just the talent wasn't here to pull this kind of stuff off. This is probably going to sound insulting, but it's the best comparison that I can think of. A lot of these stills and expressions look like they come from Newgrounds or DeviantArt, like 2006, as someone's first Newgrounds or DeviantArt post. What I'm trying to say is it looks more like what I'd expect from a hobbyist doing this for free, rather than a professional studio doing a paid job. Mikey often looks fine, like a typical cartoon character from the era, but all of the anime characters, whenever they strike a pose or an expression, it almost always looks very bad. And that's because one of the strengths of typical anime, at least the anime that you get here in the West, is its expression. Anime can get away with more limited movement because even in still, it looks appealing. They go a lot further with solid drawing. The issue is definitely the Flash animation. And yes, I checked, Kappa Mikey is animated in Flash. Now, I do tend to talk down Adobe Flash a lot. It's true, a lot of really great shows have used Flash to great effect. Friendship is Magic is the most standout example, and that's the one that's often pointed to. The issue with Flash is that people who use it tend to use it to make shortcuts. Flash works really well with characters made of very simple shapes. The more complicated the character is, the better you are using a different tool. And when you're trying to do an anime style, which uses very complicated designs, you've got an issue. You're using the wrong tool for the job. And considering the occasional use of CGI, I have to assume there was some issues with budget allocation, because the show never really needed CGI. Now, you get used to the animation over time. It's not like, say, Problem Solvers or Secret Fort Mountain Awesome, where no matter how many episodes I watched, I could never look at it for more than a good few minutes. You eventually stop caring about the animation, but it does take a while, and I can see this being very alienating. This show feels in many ways like the technology just wasn't ready to make it. I could imagine that if this show was made today with our much better technology, it would look really interesting, even appealing, especially as we have more anime to work with and more types of anime have hit mainstream consciousness. But unfortunately, the show probably will not be remade because of other aspects of the show that have aged poorly. I'm going to say up front that what I'm about to talk about, I personally don't care about, and they didn't affect my enjoyment of the show, but I can see this affecting some people's enjoyment of it, so I'm going to go into them. Kappa Mikey is a very mid-2000s show, and more than just its animation. And by that, I mean it does a lot of things that we don't do anymore, at least not without pushback. Ozu, the businessman, and Yes Man are both voiced by American actors putting on moderate to heavy Japanese accents.
Rule number 1. Be in bed by 9 o'clock.
Make it 8!
Rule number 2. Don't play with your food.
No food for anyone!
Like I said, personally, I don't care, but I'd imagine that it makes some people feel not too comfortable. And there's also one other thing, and that's what can be described as Lily's catchphrase.
Spazoid, Spaz's leg.
Now, spaz was not a dirty word in the United States back when the show first aired, and even today, it's still not a dirty word, don't at me. But I understand that it's a taboo word in some other countries like the United Kingdom. And this show says that word a lot. Multiple times per episode. Like, more than they say dork in Ed, Edd n Eddy. The characters are very much of their time. If you watched a cartoon from the 2000s, you probably come across these character types. There's the hot-headed girl who hates the main guy who has a crush on her. The super stupid idiot who never stops eating. The authority figure always wanting to ruin the main character's fun. But I will say this. While these are not new character types by any stretch of the imagination, I did eventually have a lot of fun with them. Ozu is probably one of my favorite characters because of how over-the-top serious he can be. Like, one time he gets so angry that the sky rains on his golf game that he invents a machine to control the weather. And Yes Man, with how dedicated he is to Ozu, is just a treat.
Unless everyone begs at the feet of Ozu!
Guano was another pretty good character, I would say. The show abuses him a lot, but his emotions are also so out there that it comes across as more funny than cruel. Even the character types that I don't usually like Gonards and Lilies, I found myself usually tolerating. Of course, both of them each had moments that made me groan. And then you have Matsuki. She is Matsuki. The only character that pushed things too far for me was Mikey himself. Tell me if you've heard of this one before. The really stupid main character who ruins everything for his friends because he's so stupid or insensitive, and then he acts like a jerk after he's screwed up their day, or their life. Maybe this played a lot better in 2006, but after seeing so many shows with this exact character, I've grown to loathe them. At best, it's a watered-down Fry from Futurama. It's not to say that Mikey doesn't have funny moments, but the moments where I could not stand him towered over the moments where he did make me laugh. I should also mention that I didn't hate the show, because this review is coming across as very negative. I didn't even dislike it. By no means is this a bad show, but I can't call it anything more than somewhere between okay and good. Like, if I were to give it a grade, maybe I'd be giving it like a B-, that kind of range. So, this show is weird, getting into things that I did kind of like, let me describe a plot. Lily Moo has this new video game out, but Mikey can't buy a copy because they're all sold out, and he shredded his copy. So he goes to buy a bootleg game that looks like Donkey Kong despite being on a console that looks like a GameCube. Anyway, he tries to buy this bootleg game from pirates. Like, literal pirates. In doing so, he ends up selling his friend Gonard into pirate slavery to get the game. He goes back to rescue Gonard, and in doing so, manages to get saved by Lily and Mitsuke, who have been taken out on the ocean on a gondola ride by someone who looks exactly like Mikey, except wearing sunglasses. If I could describe the show, it's throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. And also including everything that falls off the wall, too. Every so often, there's a joke that's funny. Some are even really funny. Some of Mikey's calls to his parents are actually pretty hilarious.
And if you're our only child in Japan and you're calling because you're all alone in a big empty room and you miss the comforting sound of another human voice, stay on the line as we read from a list of words chosen at random from the dictionary.
Vermicular.
Liberty gibbet.
Mortgage.
Pedal.
Disenfranchise.
But more often, the jokes are just out there. Like a Phantom of the Opera parody with the titular Phantom having a Christopher Walken impression. Later on, the episodes start having like actual stories of the beginning, middle, and end, but for a good deal of it, they're random events plots. They start in a place and go to the next place because I guess the writer had a funny idea while taking their bathroom break. Like I said, sometimes it works, and you get a nice funny joke, but the other 90% of the time, it's just odd. Not bad, just weird. I mean, it's not like it's gross or disturbing or anything like that, but it's often just engaging enough to want to see where the episode is going, and nothing beyond that. I'd imagine if I still watched television, Kappa Mikey would be that show that I'd watch through if there was nothing better on, as I waited for the show I actually wanted to watch to come on next. But at the same time, it's not a show that I'd seek out. I'd watch it if it were on if I had nothing better to do, basically. The show also has a continuity, which I didn't expect. Characters and such make reappearances down the line. They introduce things that change up the dynamics in very small ways, and considering what kind of show this is, I don't think that was the best idea. Narrative is not exactly the show's strong suit. the stories only barely make sense, and I guess if you missed an episode that they're referencing, it would fit in as a noodle event. But still, I'd only imagine these stories working completely self-contained. The show does have quite a few pop culture references, in probably the worst way of doing pop culture references. I mean, it's a show that's meant to be parodying anime, so pop culture references are definitely appropriate here, but it's how they do it. Like with the actual plots, their references are very scattershot. I never imagined Kappa Mikey to be the kind of show to incorporate Smooth Criminal into its background music.
Let's see it!
It's hero time!
He's graceful yet old!
The issue is that they don't seem to understand what they're referencing. Like, one episode has the anime character referencing Star Wars, when that's probably something that Mikey should be referencing. The video game episode, for instance, is a big example of this. Like I said, the Lily Moo game looks like Donkey Kong. And yeah, Donkey Kong is definitely a fine thing to homage to, but video games didn't look like Donkey Kong in 2006. Maybe in something like The Simpsons or something like that slide, but this is a show that's supposed to be based on like otaku culture, and games at the time didn't look like Donkey Kong. The audience would clearly know that that's not what video games look like. All I'm saying is that in an episode that has a Chun-Li cameo, you should put a little bit more effort into what your actual video game is. I'm not the biggest anime buff in the world, obviously, but I'd imagine that if I was into the anime scene a lot more, the show would actually probably be even more disappointing. Like, when you think anime and pirates, what's the first thing that come to mind?
Don't give it up, Luffy! Don't give it up, Solo!
Yeah. So why do the pirates in this anime show look like just generic pirates, when you've got a source material that you could pull from and directly parody? The show can be very selective with what it pulls. One episode is about recycling, and it goes on explaining how Japan recycles most of its garbage because the island doesn't have a lot of room for landfills. At the same time, everyone wears shoes inside of their homes, which is a big no-no in Japan. And it's another one of the reasons I feel the show just came out too early. Stuff like that is much more common knowledge in the modern era, especially with anime's continued and growing presence. And you know, now we have actual Japanese people talking about their home life and their culture on social media. The most accurate parodies that the show has aren't actually about anime. Like, one of my favorite episodes was when the Lily Moo team gets into a battle of the bands with Puffy Amiyumi, which in hindsight is a show that I gave too much flack to, and is basically what this show is trying to do, but much, much better. If I could describe Kappa Mikey, this show is more in love with being an anime fan than being a fan of anime. It knows what an anime should look like, but they don't have much to actually reference on. And the things that they do take from anime don't seem to help much, like repeated animation. Every episode starts with a segment from Lily Moo until it's interrupted by a problem that sparks the episode's plot. Then at the end of the episode, we have that exact same animation. Sometimes it's truncated and sometimes it has a change, but usually the only thing that's changed is the ending, where the problem they had last time is completely solved. It comes across as very lazy, because some of these Lily Moo segments can go on for like minutes. At the time, America was really getting into Japanese culture, especially as anime continued to go mainstream, and that's really what the show does feel like. It feels like a cash-in on a trend. However, for a cash-in, you could definitely do a lot worse. Like, if you're really into the anime stuff, where it seems like a show like this would be right up your alley, you're actually probably not going to like the show. But if you just want an interesting show that's not afraid to get really weird in a relatively unique location, it might be worth checking out. Hey, you've reached the end of the video. The names scrolling by right now are of all the wonderful patrons who've donated to help keep this channel alive. If you'd like your name in the credits, head on over and make a donation yourself. Also, be sure to check out my Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok for exclusive content and previews of my upcoming videos. I've also got a forum where you can discuss anything that has to do with my content and connect with the rest of the community. To find anything that I mentioned, just visit my link tree in the description down below. Lastly, be sure to subscribe, comment, and share this video with your friends. Oh, and thanks for watching.